We are now going to trace a circuit through the schematic. Let's start by looking at the immersion heater circuit. The heater is depicted on sheet 2. We can see that the heater is 7200 watts and 208 volts. The heater is turned on by contactor 2K1. The coil of contactor 2K1 is also on the same sheet at line 232. The circuit breaker that protects the heater is 2F1, and as you can see on the sheet, it is a 25 amp breaker. Following the power wires, we can see that the circuit is continued on sheet 1, line 49, by looking at the hexagons numbered 149. Moving to sheet 1 now, we can find line 49, and also note that the hexagons show that the circuit continues back to 200, which is where we came from. Moving up, we can see that the circuit continues at line 124, and then to the distribution block, and finally to the main disconnect. This is the source of the 208 volt power. Next, let's look at the e-stop button on the operator console. This button is intended to disable the system. We'll see how this is done. The button is depicted on sheet 6. The button has 2 wires connected to it, wires 500 and 501. They leave this sheet and go to point 446. So let's move on to sheet 4. We're going to look at line 46, and there we will find wires 500 and 501. The source voltage comes in from an optional e-stop switch and to wire 446. Now let's follow wire 446. It goes to point 225. So, where are we going to go? To sheet 2, line 25. Here we find 446 continuing on and connecting to 1Q1, the main disconnect on terminal 4. Then from terminal 3, wire 338 goes to point 332. So, we're going to go to sheet 3 now. Wire 338 terminates on the 0 volts DC of the 24 volts DC power supply. Once we determine that 0 volts DC originates at the 24 volts DC power supply through the service disconnect and then through the e-stop switch, we can continue to trace the circuit in the other direction. So going back, now we see it connects to an optional e-stop button or jumper and terminates on terminal X25. This circuit takes 2 routes from here. One goes on to point 436 and the other to a contactor coil MCR. First, we will follow to point 436. Now at point 436, moving to the right, we will find that the e-stop wire connects to terminal X25. Remember that X always indicates an input. On the opposite side of the terminal strip, there's a purple wire that comes from input cable 2 going to the PLC. Following the input cable 2, it goes to point 411, which is on the same sheet. So let's look at that now. We're going to follow 411 over and find input cable 2. It connects to the PLC in the 3rd cable connection point. We also previously determined that the circuit involves contactor MCR. The circuit connects to it on terminal A2. A1 connects to wire 340. This wire is 24 volts DC and connects back at the same DC power supply. It can be traced using the same method. But for now, we will continue to see what the contactor MCR does. Let's look closely at the contactor symbol. The circle indicates the solenoid coil. Energizing this coil will make the contactor engage the contacts. When the e-stop button is pressed, however, the contactor will disengage. This will open the contacts. To the right, you will see the points in the schematic that show the contacts of MCR. They are 514, 523, 538, and 547. All of these are on sheet 5. Looking at lines 514, 523, 538, and 547, you can see that there are contacts for the MCR. If the e-stop button is pushed, the connection will be broken, and the output relays will no longer have 120 volts AC. This will disable the system.